Okay, good morning. Thanks so much for coming out bright and early. I'm going to start us off this morning with a presentation entitled Moving Beyond Blueprint Solutions, Evaluating Conservation Success Across Diverse Equator Initiative Case Studies. So just to give you a quick overview of my presentation today, I'm going to start out by delving into the literature and talking a little bit about conceptualizations and approaches to conservation that we see in the academic literature. I'm then going to bring that down to the ground by talking about 3 different Equator Initiative case studies. So I'll give you a little bit of background on the Equator Initiative, and then talk about these 3 integrated conservation development case studies. I'll then wrap up by kind of tying them back to the literature that I've covered at the beginning of the presentation. Okay, so to start out, when we look at the conservation literature, we see 2 concepts that are kind of diametrically opposed that come up time and time again. So there's this idea of people-free conservation, which is the idea that in order to conserve biodiversity, we need to set up these pristine people-free areas to maximize our conservation success. And this is a concept that really originated in the late 19th century with the creation of national parks in the US. And as we all know, it's widely used around the world to set aside areas that are conserved for plants and wildlife. The initiatives such as these tend to be top-down, really initiated by government or high-level players, with usually little to no involvement of communities. On the flip side of the coin, we have people-centered conservation, which is this idea that really came into play in the 1980s, that communities and people should really be at the heart of conservation initiatives, that they should be bottom-up work that address development concerns as well as conservation. So both of these approaches are pretty common in the literature today, but they kind of threaten to become blueprint solutions that are applied either setting aside land without people or working solely with communities at the grassroots level. And blueprint solutions, no matter what they are, aren't successful for conservation. Each case is so specific, conditioned by local cultures, local ecosystems, local biodiversity, and we really need to be able to modify approaches to create case-specific approaches to developing sustainable conservation initiatives. So 2 ideas that have been emerging lately in the conservation literature that I really want to highlight in this talk are co-management and biocultural conservation. And they both kind of exist on a spectrum between this idea of people-free and people-centered conservation. So co-management is generally the sharing of power between 2 groups, usually a local community and the government, to manage typically a protected area. Again, this is setting aside land, but usually there's more community involvement in the initiative in terms of delineating boundaries as well as determining different use areas. Biocultural conservation is the idea that conservation action should be made to conserve both biodiversity and cultural diversity. And we can think of this as kind of a spectrum from initiatives where biodiversity conservation is the most important, with a small emphasis on cultural conservation, to initiatives where cultural conservation is really at the heart of biodiversity conservation. Okay, so I've thrown all this stuff from the conservation literature at you. What does this actually look like in practice? So when I ask that question, I'm interested particularly in the degree of co-management, where it falls on the spectrum of community-government engagement, as well as the importance of culture and conservation. So in order to look at these questions, I'm going to focus on 3 Equator Prize-winning communities. So why these communities? The Equator Initiative is a subset of the UN Development Program that focuses on recognizing and advancing local sustainable development solutions. So as part of this work, they award the Equator Prize biennially, and this involves an extensive selection process which usually whittles down over 1,000 nominations to about 20 winners. So selection is a multi-stage process with a review by multidisciplinary experts in various fields. And this is intended to recognize best practices in biodiversity conservation and poverty reduction. So over 15 years, the Equator Initiative has recognized 208 winners from over 70 countries. Each of these groups has a case study written about it. You can see these here, which is produced in English and local language. So this is a really rich resource for looking at what's actually working in various locales around the world. So I pulled out 3 different case studies. This is really kind of exploratory. It is not intended to be comprehensive in any way. So I'm going to whip through these really quickly here to give you an idea of the work that these groups are doing. So I first want to go to Bolivia, Capitanía del Alto y Bajo Izalzar. So this is a coalition of 23 indigenous communities in southern Bolivia that formed in response to threats from oil exploitation and the clearing of forests for ranching and agriculture. This group has extensive indigenous land that wasn't recognized by the government. So they took a kind of dual approach to obtain land rights to their traditional land. The first was working with the government to establish a 3.4 million hectare national park, which they co-manage with the government in a very standard arrangement of government consultation with the community in terms of where the park boundaries should be set, and what should be off-access and what should be mixed-use areas. They also applied for a designation in Bolivia that's called a TCO, which grants the community rights to all above-ground resources, and this covers 1.9 million hectares. So in addition to pursuing these land rights, they've also worked with partners to develop a park management plan, as well as to promote the revitalization of sustainable livelihoods. So this group works with a diverse range of partners from the local to international level, which has been really a key factor in their continual evolution and ability to face various challenges over the past 20 plus years. So going back to the 2 areas that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, what can we learn from this case? First of all, this is a pretty textbook example of community government co-management, where the government holds the majority of the power but is actively consulting the community to see how to manage this national park area. Second of all, culture is important in this case, but it's not the primary driving force. We really see this initiative emerging in response to threats from extractive industries and promoting livelihoods, but there is a huge emphasis on cultural preservation. Okay, second group. Moving across the oceans to Turkey, this is the Mediterranean Conservation Society. So this group originated in response to threats from commercial fishing industries, which were overharvesting basically, and leading to decreased catch sizes for local fisherfolk as well, and decreases in their income. So this group worked with local fishing cooperatives to establish over 2,400 hectares of no-take zones and marine protected areas. They also established a community patrol program where the cooperative members themselves patrol these areas and apprehend violators of the no-take zones. What's interesting about this case is the community approached the government to ask them to support the community patrol program. So they were able to draw in the Coast Guard, who actually has the authority to apprehend trespassers in the no-take zones. They've also used scientific studies from the beginning of the initiative to document biodiversity. So they've been able to show really concretely the effects of their work in terms of biodiversity and fish biomass in the area in which they're working. So they also work with a diverse range of partners from the local to international level, which has really supported them in terms of diversifying their programs as well as having support for the enforcement aspect of their work. So from this case, this is an interesting example of co-management where we see a really bottom-up co-management approach. Instead of the government approaching the community, it's really been something that's been driven by the community themselves drawing the government in. In this case, culture is not an important driving force. This is really a livelihoods and biodiversity-based program with little to no emphasis on culture of the surrounding communities. Okay, last case. The Sociocultural Association of the Yawanawa People of Brazil. So this group arose in the 1990s with a strong focus on cultural revitalization. This is a traditionally nomadic group that had settled in a few settlements and were facing a strong decline in their traditional culture. So as part of this cultural revitalization, they began to apply to obtain land rights. They worked with their regional and national government to obtain rights to over 400,000 hectares of land. In tandem with this, they also developed several strategic partnerships with various commercial industries, the most important of which was Aveda. So their partnership with Aveda is quite interesting in that they signed a contract not only to provide seeds of the urapun fruit, which is used as a pigment in various Aveda products, but they also allow Aveda to use their culture and their cultural image to market these products. So this is an initiative that really wouldn't function without that cultural component because Aveda is particularly interested in the culture and kind of secondarily interested in these seeds. So for this initiative, we really see that culture is essential in terms of the driving force as well as their ability to pursue some of these livelihood strategies. So again here, strong range of partners, including Aveda, but not limited to Aveda, that work from the local to international levels. In terms of what we can learn from this case, first of all, community government co-management is not present. The community worked with the government to obtain their land rights, but they are responsible for biodiversity conservation within their traditional lands. Second of all, cultural conservation and capitalization is a central part of this initiative. It's the primary focus of the initiative, and it's one of the primary things that actually has led to the success of the initiative. Okay, so to kind of look at all of these in a single picture, really quickly in the minute that I have left, we can see in terms of co-management that these groups kind of exist across a spectrum, where the Yawanao people really don't display any co-management with the government, to the Bolivian case where there is a very typical government community co-management case. In terms of biocultural conservation, again here we can see a spectrum from the Mediterranean Conservation Society where culture really is not a driving factor to the Yawanao where it's central to the initiative. So we can see with using co-management and biocultural conservation, there's really a spectrum of approaches that can be applied in different ways and in different manners. But I really quickly want to highlight some of the things that all three groups share that have been successful for their success. The first is the diversity partnerships from the local to international level. They all additionally display continual adaptation and evolution in response to challenges and opportunities, working with these partners to adapt to changing circumstances. National policy has been incredibly important for all these groups, both in terms of obtaining land rights and enforcing these land rights. And finally, international policy can and will be important in terms of the pressure that it can put on these groups, in terms of the pressure it can put on national governments to enact laws and policies that support local communities and curtail the power of extractive industries. So with that, I will say thank you before Adam gets up.
Just time for questions.
Yeah, we have time for questions.
I have one. What kind of role do you think ethnobotanists can play in these sorts of endeavors in the future?
So I think one thing that's really, I think one thing that's really important, for a lot of these groups, funders really latch onto quantitative data in terms of impacts. So the thing that is most impressive out of a lot of these cases to me is the Mediterranean Conservation Society, because they have such strong data about biodiversity and how this conservation has led to change in species conservation as well as increases in fish biomass. That's something they've been able to demonstrate to funders as well as to their national government to show the success of the initiative. So I think partnerships between ethnobotanists and communities doing work on the ground can really provide strong supportive data to demonstrate the impacts of these initiatives.
Yes, so when you're saying that, like, for example, the community government
Co-management?
Yeah, co-management.
Yeah.
So now is UNDP like helping how is the community able to like sort of leverage and make this happen? Is this where your role comes in? Do you make them aware of like, here's organizations and here's government policies? Like, is your role to help them see how this could happen?
In some ways, so first, the Equator Initiative is usually given to groups that are already pretty well established. So in these cases, those partnerships had already been set up through the community's work on their own. I didn't have a chance to talk about it, but often they're really strongly supported by boundary organizations or bridging organizations they're referred to in the literature.
Bridging?
Bridging.
Okay.
So that really bring together local knowledge and scientific knowledge and kind of network between these groups and the government. So like Wildlife Conservation Society is a huge partner for the Bolivian group that has really supported them in terms of their land rights claims and working with the government.